I had a plan, one that didn't involve asking questions, confronting her, or begging for answers. No, this plan was about silence. The quiet revenge of simply not reacting. When I realized what was happening, it wasn't a sudden explosion of clarity. It wasn't a bombshell moment where the truth hit me in the face. No, it was more like a dull ache that spread slowly, quietly. I didn't want to admit what was going on, but I knew. And somewhere deep inside, I resented myself for knowing and not acting on it sooner. You see, I've always been the quiet one. The kind of person who goes along with things. The one who avoids confrontation, who lets things slide. It wasn't that I didn't have a backbone. I just didn't know how to wield it. Her name is Laura, my wife of nearly 7 years. For the longest time, I thought we were perfect. And maybe we were, in the beginning. But that was before I started noticing her phone glued to her hand. Before I started hearing her talk about work trips that didn't quite add up. Before I started noticing the way she'd come home late with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't want to believe it. So I didn't. But the silence between us began to grow louder. The small lies piled up until I could no longer ignore the unmistakable smell of betrayal in the air. What did I do? Nothing. And that was my mistake. I watched as she grew more distant, more distracted, as she started slipping away in tiny, inconspicuous ways. She said she was busy with work. She said she was tired. She said it was nothing, but something in me knew better. Something in me felt like I was being replaced, not physically, not in any obvious way, but emotionally. I kept waiting for her to come back to me. I kept waiting for her to snap out of it and realize she was losing me. But nothing ever changed. She kept going through the motions, and I kept pretending I didn't see it. I kept waiting for the moment when I'd have a clear, undeniable reason to stand up and say, "This is it. This ends now." But that moment never came. Instead, I decided to create the moment. Instead of confronting her, instead of demanding answers, I decided to simply change the narrative. I wasn't going to fight for her attention anymore. I wasn't going to ask her what was wrong. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to show her what it looked like when someone who had been overlooked disappeared. It started small. One day, while she was at work, I packed a bag. I didn't make a big deal about it. No dramatic exits. No shouting matches. Just the quiet, methodical packing of my things. I left the house, everything left behind except for a note. The note wasn't long or eloquent. It simply said, "I'm gone. I'm done pretending." I left it on the kitchen counter, right where she would see it when she came home. The next day, I stayed away. I didn't answer her texts or her calls. I didn't check the notifications on my phone when she messaged me. I didn't even open the door when she knocked. I wanted her to feel that silence. The kind of silence that made her realize that the one thing she could always count on, the one person who was always there, was now gone. And for the first time in years, I felt free. No guilt, no fear, just quiet. A quiet that was louder than any argument could ever be. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that this silence wasn't going to be one-sided. I wasn't just disappearing into the void. I was waiting for her. Waiting for the day when the truth would finally hit her, when she would understand that she had taken me for granted. I wasn't going to play by her rules anymore. I wasn't going to let her keep treating me like a placeholder, like a background character in the story of her life. I was going to change the story, and the first chapter of that story was about to unfold in ways she never expected. I never expected to feel so much peace and silence. After I left, I didn't know exactly what would happen. In some way, I thought Laura would notice. I thought she'd come running after me, begging me to come back, realizing how much I truly meant to her. But as the days passed, I learned something I hadn't anticipated. When someone stops being needed, they stop being noticed. The silence was deafening, but it was also an answer. As much as I wanted to see her come to me, I realized she was too comfortable in her routine, too used to things staying the same. The more time passed, the more I realized that maybe I had been the one to keep the connection alive all these years. I had held the threads of our marriage together, quietly, patiently. And when I let go, the threads unraveled, and I was no longer there to hold it all up. The first couple of days after I left, I stayed in a small apartment that I had rented in the city. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom unit, but it was mine. I wanted to see what it felt like to have something of my own again. I wanted to breathe, to reclaim parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of her expectations, her demands. As the days drifted by, I would get the occasional text from Laura, Questions like, "Where are you?" or "Why aren't you answering me?" But I ignored them. I had made my point. I wasn't going to explain myself, and I wasn't going to run back. For once, I had control. I remember the first time I walked through the streets of the city, not worrying about being late to a dinner, or worrying if I'd disappoint her if I didn't pick up the phone. I walked at my own pace, stopped to have coffee at a place I'd never been to before, and for the first time in ages, I felt like I was truly breathing. At first, I didn't miss her. I couldn't. The anger I had built up over the months, years, maybe, of neglect and betrayal kept me from wanting to reach out. She had hurt me, and the only way I knew how to make it stop was to disappear. I had learned that she could live without me, but I didn't want to see just how easily I could live without her. But as the days went on, something began to shift in me. It wasn't longing or regret, it was curiosity. I wanted to see how far this would go. I wanted to know how long it would take for her to realize what she had lost. It was on the fourth day that I finally got the call. My phone rang while I was sitting in a cafe, nursing my third cup of coffee of the day. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew it was her. I let it ring for a few seconds before I answered, my heart pounding for reasons I wasn't quite sure of. "Greg." Laura's voice was shaky, like she had been crying. "Where are you?" I could hear the desperation in her tone. "I'm where I need to be," I said quietly, keeping my voice calm. "You left. You left without saying anything. What do you expect me to do?" she asked, her voice rising. "What do you expect me to do, Laura?" I shot back, my patience thinning. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to watch someone you love slip away, to watch them turn their back on you while you're still trying to hold on?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I don't know what's happening, Greg," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this." I sat back in my chair, looking out the window at the busy street below. People rushed by, completely unaware of the storm brewing between two people they would never meet. It felt surreal, like I was living in a different world now. "You can't fix this," I said softly, though the words cut like a knife. "You can't fix something that's been broken for so long. I gave you everything, Laura. And now, I'm just gone." I didn't give her a chance to respond. I hung up before she could say anything else. I wasn't sure why I had called her back in the first place. Maybe I needed to hear her voice, needed to see if she was still capable of caring. But the truth was, I had already made my decision. The next few days were filled with more silence. The texts became less frequent, and when they did come, they were half-hearted apologies and desperate pleas for me to come home. Each time I read them, I felt a little less. The anger I had been holding on to was fading, and what replaced it was something I didn't quite understand: emptiness. It wasn't just her betrayal that had hurt me. It was the realization that I had been living for someone else's happiness for so long. I had forgotten what it meant to live for my own. I had been existing, not living. And now, with all the space in the world, I was finally starting to figure out who I was. But this silence, this break from everything, wasn't just about healing. It was about something bigger. Something I hadn't figured out yet, but something was brewing beneath the surface. And I couldn't turn back. The days blurred together in a haze of silence, and I found myself slowly getting used to it. The solitude was strange at first, but it was liberating in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had forgotten what it was like to be alone with my thoughts, to not have to worry about whether or not Laura would be upset with me, to not be constantly walking on eggshells. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without feeling guilty for taking up space in my own life. I spent my time rediscovering old hobbies, the things I had pushed aside to make room for her needs, her demands. I started reading books I hadn't picked up in ages, spending time with friends I hadn't seen in far too long. I walked around the city, getting lost in its rhythm, in its noise. It was like I had been holding my breath for years, and now I was finally exhaling. But even in the midst of this strange peace, there were moments when the guilt crept back in, when I wondered if I had done the right thing by just disappearing. What kind of person was I? Was I running away from something? Or was I simply giving myself the space I had needed for so long? Was I being selfish? Or was this the kind of healing I deserved? Then, on the seventh day, the knock came. It was late in the evening, the sun just beginning to set as I sat on the couch, sipping a glass of red wine and scrolling through my phone. I heard it, the sound of someone knocking at the door. Not just a casual tap, but a heavy, urgent knock, the kind that rattles the frame. For a moment, I froze. My mind raced with thoughts of who it could be. Was it Laura? Had she finally tracked me down? Was this it? The moment where everything came crashing down, where I had to face the mess I had left behind. I stood up, walking slowly toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached for the handle, I took a deep breath. When I opened the door, it wasn't Laura standing there. It was a man I didn't recognize, tall with dark hair, dressed in a sharp suit. He had an air of confidence about him, the kind that came from years of being used to getting what he wanted. "I'm looking for Greg Holloway," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. "That's me," I said, not sure whether I should be alarmed or intrigued. He didn't offer his hand, just stood there for a moment, sizing me up. "I'm Ryan," he said finally, his eyes scanning me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" I asked, my voice steady, though I couldn't hide the curiosity creeping into my tone. He glanced around, clearly assessing the situation. "Mind if I come in?" I hesitated for a split second, then stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit, walking directly to the couch and sitting down. I stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do. "Look, I'm not here to waste your time," Ryan began, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I'm here because of your wife." My heart skipped a beat. "Laura, what about her?" I asked, though a part of me already knew where this was headed. "I work with Laura," Ryan said. "We've been close for a while. I think you've probably figured that out by now." I clenched my jaw. So, this was what it had come to. The man, the one who had replaced me in her life, the one who had been slipping into the gaps I had left behind, taking everything I had worked for. "I know what you're thinking," Ryan continued, almost as if reading my mind. "But I'm not here to gloat. I'm not here to rub anything in your face." He paused for a moment, studying me closely. "I'm here because I think you need to know the truth." I folded my arms across my chest, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "And what's that?" Ryan leaned forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "Laura doesn't love you anymore." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the shock of hearing it. It was the bluntness of it, the fact that someone else was coming here, uninvited, to tell me what I had already known deep down. That everything I had been clinging to, everything I had been holding on to, was nothing more than a fantasy. "I know that already," I said, my voice betraying more emotion than I intended. Ryan gave me a quick, tight-lipped smile. "Then you understand. She's been lying to you for months, maybe even longer. But now it's over. She's not coming back to you, Greg. Not ever. You've been replaced." It felt like the world had paused. I had been living in this strange limbo, thinking maybe I could force things back into place, hoping maybe there was a chance. But now I understood. There was no going back. There never had been. "What do you want from me?" I asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. "I want you to walk away," Ryan said. "For your own sake. You don't need to keep fighting for someone who's already moved on." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself asking the question, what now? Ryan stood up, his eyes flicking to the door. "I'll leave you to think about it. But I think you know what you need to do." And with that, he turned and walked out of my life, just like that. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there for a long moment, taking in what had just happened. My chest felt tight, my throat dry. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or scream, or just sit in silence for the rest of my life. But as the minutes ticked by, something shifted in me. I wasn't going to let this man, or Laura, or anyone else dictate my life anymore. I had been invisible for so long, but no longer. I stood in the empty room, the silence wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. Ryan's words lingered in the air like smoke, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly alone. Laura had already moved on. She was with someone else. She had found comfort in another man, someone who was not me. The realization was almost too much to bear, and yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew it was the truth. For a while, I just stared at the door, waiting for something, anything, to change. I was hoping that this moment would pass, that I could somehow escape the crushing weight of it all. But it didn't pass. It didn't change. It stayed with me, rooted deep in my chest like a dark secret I couldn't shake. I thought back to all the years I had spent with Laura. The laughter, the arguments, the nights spent planning our future, believing that we were solid, that we were in this together. Now, it seems so fragile, so easy to break. But something else started to rise within me, a feeling I hadn't expected. Not anger, not sadness, but something sharper, more urgent. A desire to reclaim what was mine, to take control of my life again. I had spent so long holding on to the idea of Laura, of our marriage, that I hadn't realized how much I had given up of myself. I had become a version of me that was defined by her, by what she needed, by what she wanted. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear. I had been living in her shadow, silently agreeing to let her shape my world. But I was done. I wasn't going to chase her anymore. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of affection or attention. I wasn't going to be the man she turned to only when it was convenient. I was done being invisible. I picked up my phone, feeling the weight of the decision in my hands. I scrolled through the contacts, my thumb hovering over Laura's name. I knew what I had to do. It was time to stop hiding, to stop waiting for answers. It was time for me to take control of the narrative. I deleted her number. It was a simple, almost insignificant action, but it felt like a tidal wave. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, as though I had freed myself from the chains I had bound myself with for so long. I set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The streets were alive, the people walking past in a blur of motion, moving forward with their own lives, their own stories. I felt strangely detached from it all, like I was watching life through a glass. But there was a flicker of something else, a spark of hope, a glimmer of freedom. I had a choice now. I could stay in this limbo, waiting for something that would never come, or I could move forward. I could take control, step into the unknown, and build a life that was mine. No more waiting, no more wondering. For the first time in a long time, I made a decision for myself. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for me to take that step, the phone rang again. It was an unknown number this time. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt my pulse quicken. Could it be her? Could it be Laura, calling to apologize, to beg me to come back? I answered before I could second-guess myself. Hello. Greg, a voice said, calm but firm. It's Ryan. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Ryan. The man who had walked into my life like a wrecking ball. The man who had made it clear that my marriage was nothing more than a faint memory for Laura. I felt a brief pang of anger, but I kept my voice steady. What do you want? I asked, my tone clipped. I think you need to hear this, Ryan said, his voice measured, like he knew something I didn't. It's about Laura. I don't think you understand what's really going on. I felt my chest tighten. I don't need to know anything more. I know enough. Ryan's voice dropped, almost conspiratorial. You think you do? But what if I told you that she's not as happy as you think she is? What if I told you that she's been? Enough. I cut him off, my patience wearing thin. I'm done with all of this. Done with you. Done with her. I'm moving on. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I almost expected him to hang up. But then, Ryan spoke again, his voice lower, more intense. Greg, you're making a mistake. You don't know everything yet. There's more to this than you think. I clenched my fist around the phone, feeling the weight of his words. It was a warning, I realized, but I didn't want to hear it. I had made my decision. I had to move on, no matter what it took. I don't care what you think I know, I said firmly. I've made my choice. And you should make yours too. Because I'm not coming back. I'm not going to keep playing this game with you, or with Laura. I'm done. Ryan didn't reply immediately. I could hear the faint sound of his breath on the other end, as if he were calculating his next move. But I didn't wait for him to speak. I ended the call. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in ages, I felt like I was on my own terms. No more games. No more lies. This was the moment I would reclaim my life, and nothing would stop me from moving forward. The days after I hung up on Ryan felt like a blur. Time moved strangely, like I was living in between two worlds, the world I had left behind with Laura, and the world I was just beginning to create for myself. Every time I walked through the city, every time I took a moment to breathe without the weight of her presence looming over me, I felt a strange sense of freedom mixed with unease. I thought about the words Ryan had said. He had tried to warn me, but I wasn't listening. I had made my choice, and I couldn't afford to look back now. The door to that part of my life was closed, sealed shut. Or at least, I told myself it was. Still, there was that small voice inside me, the one I couldn't quite shake off, asking if I had done the right thing. I had walked away without knowing the full story. I hadn't heard Laura's side. But then, one day, I received a message that would shatter the fragile peace I had built for myself. It was late, just past midnight, actually. I had just come back from a long walk in the cold, the kind that helped clear my mind. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter, not bothering to turn on the lights. But then, the soft glow of my phone screen caught my attention. A single notification. The message read, simply, "We need to talk." It was from Laura. I stood there, staring at the message for what felt like an eternity. My heart began to beat faster, a mix of curiosity, dread, and something else, a sickening feeling that I couldn't name. I hadn't heard from her since I left. And now, here she was, reaching out to me, as if nothing had changed. I should have ignored it. I should have kept walking forward, kept moving away from her and everything that had tied me to that life. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself typing a response before I could stop myself. Why now? After all this time? I waited. Seconds felt like hours, and I found myself pacing around the kitchen, anxiety slowly bubbling up to the surface. When my phone buzzed again, I froze. Her reply was short, cold, but laden with an unmistakable sense of urgency. "I need you to meet me. Please, Greg. There's something you don't know. I need to explain." I didn't respond immediately. I put my phone down and sat down at the kitchen table, my hands gripping the edge. The words "something you don't know" echoed in my mind. What could she possibly say that would change anything? What could she possibly say to convince me that all of this, everything that had happened, had some deeper meaning? I had been asking myself that question for weeks. But now, as her message lingered in my head, I realized that there was something I hadn't yet accounted for. No matter how much I wanted to turn away, I was still tethered to her. No matter how much I had tried to escape, I still felt that pull. And so, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. The next evening, I found myself sitting at a small cafe, just as I had been so many times with Laura, waiting. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of the moment hanging over me. Was I making a mistake? Was I opening a door I wasn't ready to open? I didn't know, but I couldn't go on without knowing. She arrived late, just as I expected. I saw her before she saw me, her figure outlined in the dim light of the street as she walked toward the cafe, head down, shoulders tense. She didn't look up when she entered, but when she saw me sitting at the table, she hesitated. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The years of our relationship flashed in front of me in a blur. Our early days, the laughter, the moments of warmth, and then the slow, steady unraveling. I had forgotten how much she meant to me, how much I had once loved her. But now, there was just emptiness between us. She sat down across from me, avoiding my gaze, her hands nervously twisting a napkin. She started, but her voice faltered, and she looked down again. "Laura, what is it?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why now? Why are you doing this?" She looked up at me then, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't expected. Regret. Maybe even fear. "Greg, I didn't want it to happen this way. I didn't want to hurt you." Her voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, I almost believed her. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Then why did you? Why did you do it? Why did you lie to me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening?" Her breath hitched, and she wiped her eyes quickly, her expression breaking. "I never meant for any of it to get this far. I was scared, Greg. I didn't know how to tell you." I scoffed, not because I was angry, but because I was tired of hearing the same excuses. "Scared? You cheated on me, Laura. You've been with him behind my back, and you thought I wouldn't notice? You thought I wouldn't feel the change?" She shook her head. "No, I never thought you wouldn't notice. I didn't want to face what I was doing to you. I didn't want to face myself." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. "You should have faced it. You should have been honest with me from the beginning. But instead, you kept running, and I was the one left behind." There was a long pause between us. I could see her struggling with her emotions, but I was beyond sympathy now. I had already let go, already moved on. The pain was still there, but it no longer had control over me. "I don't know what you want from me, Laura," I said, my voice low. "I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not your second choice." She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off, turning to leave. "I've heard enough," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Laura." And I walked out of the cafe, leaving her there, with nothing left to say. The walk back to my apartment felt surreal, like I was floating above the world, watching myself move through it from a distance. I couldn't believe what had just happened, couldn't quite process the words Laura had said. She had apologized, she had explained, and yet all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I had confronted her, and yet I was no closer to understanding her actions or to understanding why I had stayed so long. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely lost. I had walked away from Laura, from everything we had built, but now I was questioning if I had made the right choice. There had been so many things left unsaid between us, so many things that she could have told me if only she had been honest. And maybe, just maybe, I could have helped her through it. But I was too late. I had already checked out of our marriage, and now I was standing in the ruins, unsure of what to do next. I made it back to my apartment, the familiar silence greeting me like an old friend. I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the weight of my own thoughts pressing down on me. I had made my decision. I had walked away, but now I was left with nothing. The apartment was quiet, the walls closed in around me, and for the first time, I realized how alone I truly was. I walked over to the kitchen counter and saw the letter. It was the one I had written the night I left, the one I had left for Laura. I hadn't read it since that night, hadn't dared to look at it. But now, with everything swirling in my mind, I picked it up. The edges of the paper were frayed, as if it had been crumpled and smoothed out again. I sat down at the kitchen table, holding the letter in my hands as I reread it. I don't know how we got here, Laura. I don't know when the cracks started showing, or when we started growing apart. But I know this, nothing lasts forever. And I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when you've already made your choice. Maybe you don't love me anymore. Maybe I don't love you the way I used to. But whatever this is, it's not enough. I'm leaving, not because I want to, but because I need to. I need to find something for myself. I need to stop waiting for you to come back to me. I can't do this anymore. Goodbye. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me as I finished reading the letter. It wasn't just the words I had written. It was everything that had led up to them. The years of love, of arguments, of compromises, the memories of what we had once been. And now, the letter was a symbol of my escape, a final goodbye that I hadn't truly meant when I wrote it. I had left her, yes. I had walked away from everything we had. But I didn't feel free. I felt like I was in limbo, stuck between the past and the future, unable to fully let go of what had been, but unwilling to go back to what we were. I placed the letter back on the table and stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city, the lights twinkling in the distance. The streets were bustling, full of people who were living their lives, making their own decisions, facing their own challenges. And here I was, stuck, trying to figure out what the next step was. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waiting for Laura to fix the mess we had made. She had moved on, and so must I. But how? The answer didn't come immediately. In fact, it didn't come at all. Instead, I spent the next few hours lost in thought, pacing around my apartment, trying to make sense of everything. I thought about the future, about what I wanted out of life, about what I deserved. I realized that for too long, I had been living for someone else's happiness. For too long, I had let my entire existence revolve around Laura, around trying to fix something that might not have ever been meant to be fixed. I needed to change. I needed to be someone who wasn't defined by the past, someone who could build a future that was his own. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a plan. It was time to move forward, to start over. No more looking back. I wasn't going to let the past dictate my future any longer. But before I could fully embrace this new chapter, there was one more thing I had to do. I needed to see Laura one last time. I needed to hear her say it. I needed her to look me in the eyes and tell me that we were truly done. Not because I wanted to reconcile, not because I wanted to go back, but because I needed to know, without a doubt, that there was nothing left between us. I grabbed my jacket, stepped out of the apartment, and walked to the place where it all started, the cafe where we had met for the first time. It seemed fitting somehow. If this was truly the end, then it was only right that we should face it here, in the place where everything began. When I arrived, I saw her sitting at the same table we had sat at all those years ago. She didn't see me at first, her eyes focused on the coffee in front of her, her fingers tapping nervously on the side of the mug. I walked up to her slowly, and when she looked up, our eyes locked. And for the first time in a long time, there was no anger, no resentment. Just the quiet realization that we had both lost something we would never get back. Laura, I said softly, my voice steady. It's time. She looked at me for a long moment, her lips trembling, before she nodded. Yeah, she whispered. It is. We sat across from each other at that same small cafe, just like we used to, but everything felt different. The air between us was thick with years of unspoken words, the space filled with a quiet tension that seemed impossible to escape. I had thought about this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was actually happening, I wasn't sure what I expected. I didn't know if I was hoping for closure, for an apology, or simply for her to acknowledge the way things had fallen apart. Laura looked older than I remembered, not in terms of years, but in the way that someone who's been through something deep and painful carries themselves. Her eyes had that same softness I had once fallen in love with, but there was something else there now, a guardedness, as if she had learned to protect herself from the very things that used to draw me in. She shifted in her seat, glancing nervously at the coffee cup in front of her, avoiding my gaze for just a second too long. The silence stretched on between us, each second feeling heavier than the last. Greg, she began, her voice quiet, uncertain. I don't really know where to start. I nodded, keeping my expression calm, though inside, my mind was racing. How could she not know where to start? We had so much to say, and yet nothing at all. How had we ended up here? Why was everything so hard now? It doesn't matter, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. We're here now, right? So let's just talk. Her eyes flickered to mine, a brief flash of something, guilt, sadness. But it disappeared quickly, and she was back to studying her coffee again. I never meant for it to get this way, she said after a long pause. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the knot forming in my stomach. Believe it? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping me. How am I supposed to believe that when you've been lying to me for months? You were never honest, Laura. I kept asking you what was wrong, and you kept saying it was nothing. But it was never nothing. You were already gone, even when you were here. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, looking away from me as if trying to avoid what was happening between us. I know, but I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid. I thought I could fix it, but every time I tried, it just seemed to make it worse. And then I met him, and she trailed off, her voice breaking. I leaned forward, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation crash down on me. And what, Laura? You just kept going, kept lying, thinking it would all fix itself? I shook my head, the anger creeping back in. You were never honest with me. You let me believe everything was fine, and I stopped myself, realizing I was about to raise my voice. I couldn't do this. I had promised myself I wouldn't lose control again. Greg, I am sorry, she whispered, her hands trembling in her lap. But I don't know how to explain it. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just lost, and I thought I could get it back, but I was lying to myself. I was lying to both of us. I stared at her for a long time, letting her words sink in. I wanted to scream, wanted to make her feel the pain that had been building in me for so long. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling that same emptiness that had plagued me for months. Finally, I spoke, my voice quieter now. You say you were lost. But you know what, Laura? I was lost too. I was lost in this relationship, thinking that if I just tried hard enough, if I just kept doing what I thought was right, you'd come back to me. But you never did. You were already gone, and I didn't even see it. Her face twisted with a mix of regret and sadness, but I didn't want to see it. I didn't need to hear any more apologies. I needed to hear the truth, and for once, I needed to stop pretending that everything could be fixed with words. I'm not angry anymore, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'm just done. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep holding on to something that's already broken. Laura's face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hands as if trying to stop the sobs that were building up inside her. It was the first time I had seen her truly vulnerable, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of compassion. But that was quickly replaced with something else, something darker. I couldn't save her anymore, not in the way I had always tried to. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. Greg, please, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Please don't go. I need you to stay. We can fix this. I shook my head, standing up slowly. No, Laura. You need to fix this. You need to fix yourself. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the door swinging closed behind me. The street was bustling with people, but I felt like I was walking through a different world. The world I had once known, the world I had been a part of with Laura, was gone, and I wasn't sure I'd ever find my way back to it. But that was okay, because as I walked through the city, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't holding on to something that wasn't real. I was free, and the future, for the first time in a long time, was mine to decide. It was a few weeks after the last conversation with Laura when I finally felt like I was truly stepping into the life I had been avoiding for so long. The days since I walked out of that cafe had been full of challenges, moments of doubt, of second-guessing myself, but also moments of freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind that comes from escaping a painful situation, but the kind that comes from realizing that you're not tied to the past anymore. I found myself waking up each morning with a clearer sense of who I was and who I wanted to be. For the first time, I wasn't living for someone else, trying to make someone else happy at the expense of my own well-being. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when I would feel a flicker of pain when I remembered Laura or thought about everything we had been through. But each day, that pain lessened a little more. I got a new job, not because I needed to escape, but because I wanted to build something for myself. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was actively pursuing my own goals, building something that had nothing to do with my past life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a quick fix, but I was beginning to trust myself again. I was beginning to believe that I could create the life I wanted, not the one I thought I was supposed to have. Then, one sunny afternoon, I got an email. It wasn't from Laura, though I had almost expected to hear from her at some point. No, it was from an old friend, someone I hadn't talked to in years. The subject line was simple. Are you still interested in taking that trip? It was an offer I couldn't ignore. Years ago, my friend and I had talked about going on a road trip across the country, just the two of us. No real destination, just a chance to reconnect with the world around us. It had always been a dream we shared, and now, as I read that email, it felt like the perfect time to take that leap. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. I replied almost immediately, "When do we leave?" A few days later, I was packing a bag, feeling the excitement build inside me. For the first time, I wasn't packing to escape a life I had outgrown. I was packing to embrace something new. The road stretched ahead, full of possibilities, and I had no idea where it would take me, but I knew it would be mine to shape. As I drove off toward the horizon, my phone buzzing with texts and messages from friends who had no idea where I was going or what I was doing, I smiled to myself. I was going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. I didn't need a perfect ending to feel complete. What I had learned over the past few months was that there wasn't a right way to heal, no formula for fixing everything. Sometimes, you just have to take it day by day and allow yourself to grow, to evolve, without the weight of the past holding you back. I was finally free of the things that had kept me stuck, free of the mistakes and the regrets. The future was wide open, and it was mine to fill with whatever I wanted.